When I made my Spear of the Magus video, a question that came up quite often after is how or if this could be usable on Guardians as well. And that's exactly what we're going to address today. Now, first of all, I do believe that Spear of the Magus on Guardian in theory is a very nice concept. Flat penetration is something that can be very beneficial for Guardians simply because they have relatively high base damage values and not the best scaling, so penetration generally benefits them. And any guard that benefits from penetration also benefits from protection reduction, which we'll also find on Spear of the Magus, and that is very good as well. So you have two factors that both do the same thing in the end, both kind of will increase your base damage, but one is just for you, the other one is for your whole team. The flat penetration that the item initially has is not the most important point for us here. It's nice because it gives you extra damage for your abilities though. The really important point is the ticking effect that reduces the enemy protections. This does a decent amount of extra damage for every ability you do, assuming that you can get those stacks up somehow. So it would be easy enough to just build the item and go with it, because, you know, those stats are generally good. The issues lie in other areas of this item. First of all, it has 50 power. 50 power is not bad, it's not a great stat in regards to power, but it's simply not very beneficial for Guardians. Guardians usually make much more use of other stats like penetration or protection reduction if you're looking for the damage department, and other than that they simply want other stats in most situations. The stat is still not terrible, it's just not one of those stats that you really want primarily. Then there's the factor that the passive does not work too well for every single Guardian, because certain Guardians just don't have enough damage ticks to make it work. We get into the guards who can make good use of it later on. The biggest issue comes from what I will call in the context of this video, competing item slots. You only have a limited amount of item slots as a Guardian, or as any guard really, and because of that you need to consider which items you really need, which items are additional beneficial situational things, and which items are just not good for your character in particular. So for example, unless you're going for some weird full damage mage build on a Guardian, Rod of Tahuti is just an item that, while it would be nice to implement in a build, will never really give you the benefit that you need as a Guardian. It is very expensive, it mostly relies on power, and you don't have much power in your build in most situations, so it's really not what you want. So if you were to go for raw damage, So Reaver would usually give you more extra damage. So you have to find out what the ideal item for the slot is, and you have to find out how much it costs, if it's worth buying, if it is a good item for the slot, and so on. In that context, it's also important to see where you're playing the Guardian in order to get the best efficiency out of what you're doing, because certain roles just demand certain items. Let's talk about that first. Support. Support is a role that is very much dependent on their teammates. It's a role that their teammates depend on very much, and as such, items should ideally always be very beneficial for the team. To some degree, Spear of the Magus does that. It does reduce the enemy's protections. The problem is that so many other items usually do more. You have Gauntlet of Thebes, you have Sovereignty, you have Hardwood Amulet, which all have these auras which will help you. They have Watcher's Gift that you want in your build at least early on to get the extra gold. You have your boots that you want to have in the build to be mobile enough. Then you will often have situational counters like Winged Blade, you will have something like Pestilence that you need to build, and all of these items are more important than Spear of the Magus. Even if you get to the point where you can build Spear of the Magus, as long as anyone else has built it, you're probably better off getting a Void Storm for your team, because it also gives you extra protections. As a support, you're typically behind your teammates in gold and XP, so you really need to compensate for that in order to stay tanky by having the right items, and that is where protective items have a lot more than Spear of the Magus would. Now, if you want to go really, really aggressive and you have a lead, then maybe on certain Guardians it's something you could consider. But the situations where that occurs to that extent, where that you could really reason for Spear of the Magus, will probably be very, very rare. There are certain support guards that have to play very aggressive anyways, and on those it makes maybe a little more sense. We get into the guard later on. Likewise, solo laners have a pretty predetermined set of certain items that they will require. For example, most solo lane Guardians rather, want Mark of the Vanguard, usually Pen Boots or CDR Boots, and then Breastplate of Valor or Obsidian Shard, or maybe Genji's Guard or something Pestilence, depending on the situation. So these are all pretty much set because you want that early defense, you want CDR, you want all this stuff, And then often you have to get like general defense against other targets as well, something like Spirit Rope maybe, or you have to get health or a secondary defensive item if you're against a very strong opponent. And then you have all these, well, other options that you kind of need. You need, basically what you will need as a solo is CDR, you will need protections, you'll need health, and you will need some utility stats on certain items, for example specific counters like Winged Blade. And with all that, there is very limited room to fit Spear of the Magus in. You basically have flex slots from the 4th slot on, if you count Mark of the Vanguard, but often these flex slots are just kind of needed to be filled with something else. You'll see that in the video I actually put Spear of the Magus in the 4th slot, and it was definitely not ideal for that particular game. I knew that, I just needed to have footage where I actually used this item, but it was really not helpful, and as such, you know, there are very problematic situations with it. Third role for Guardians, where you will typically or sometimes see them, is the jungle. In the jungle, I think you would have the best option to build this item. I think Spear of the Magus in the jungle would be a great option for Guardians there. The problem is that most jungling Guardians don't really make the best use of the items. We'll get into that right now, speaking about the gods that can make use of it. Ares. Yes, 100%. Ares has multiple ticks at his kit, and he can make absolutely amazing use of the item. He is probably the support that I would like to build on anyways, because he's usually built more aggressively, and it's something that you can maybe sometimes somehow fit in his kit. Ares is basically, along with one other god, the god that I would most want to build it on. Athena, not so much. She only has 2 damaging ability that you can use on a regular basis, and while one has 2 ticks, it's not nearly enough to keep the stacks up. Bacchus. Bacchus is not the perfect god for it, but his burp is very good to get the effect off. I do think that because his ultimate and his 2 both deal high damage on their own, you can sometimes get away with other things if you're looking for damage options, but still, even if the burp comes later, you still shred protections for your team. Cabrakan. Cabrakan can make pretty good use of this item with his Tremors. Again, he does have so many other burst abilities as well though, so it's something worth considering, but generally I would say it's a good item on Cabrakan. Fafnir. Fafnir is a bit of a situational oddball case, because Fafnir does not have that much ticking damage while in his normal form, but he has a lot while in his dragon form, so for the dragon form is really good. The reason I would say it's decent on him is because it not only applies that way, but also if he gives his steroid to teammates, and that can really help. Gap. Gap does not really have any ticking damage abilities, it's just singular instances, and as such I don't think he makes good use of the item. Capri. Capri does make good use of the item because his 2 is basically his main damaging tool, and it also ticks quite a fair bit, and as such can reduce protections quite effectively. Kumbarkana, not so much. Kumbarkana doesn't really have dots in his kit, he has very strong single instances of damage, and therefore it doesn't make sense for him. Kuzenbo. Kuzenbo is a bit weird here, but I would say that generally I wouldn't recommend it that much, but then again with the ultimate he can get a lot of ticks off, so it's kind of okay, it's a bit debatable, but then again I feel like it's not really the best item for Kuzenbo. Sobek. Sobek also has mostly singular instances of damage, and as such doesn't make the best use of the item, though he has 4 damaging abilities that he can use relatively frequently, which helps a little bit. Sylvanos. Sylvanos has ticking damage, and as such can make very good use of Spear of the Magus in combination with his 2 and his ultimate. Terra has ticking damage as well, and as such I would say it's pretty good for her as well. She can also get 2 stacks of Spear of the Magus on her 2 because it's 2 instances of damage apparently. Xingtian has all the multiple hits in his kit and the dots and the ticks and everything, so Xingtian is, along with Ares, the god I think this is best for actually. Ymir, not so much. He gets his damage off in singular instances, no dots, there are no ticks, that would make it worth it, and as such, it is not a good item for him. Through this overview, you'll notice a bit of a problem. Many of the gods that can make really good use of the item are gods that are usually just played in support and not in solo or in jungle. There are a few exceptions though, if we just go by what is played in the meta mostly. Obviously, if you want to do your pocket pick Sylvanos solo, that is totally fine. But if you're just looking at meta picks, then we have Cabrakan jungle, who should be able to make very good use of this item. We have Terra in solo, and we have Xingtian in solo. Those 3 are the ones where I would say you have a bit of an option to fit the item in if you want to do that if you can afford that, depending on the circumstances. Especially on Cabrakan, I think the circumstances will allow it fairly often. Based on that, and as general advice, and closing out the video this way, I would like to say again, consider when you need this item, when it's more beneficial than other items, when you can just rest assured that you won't need the other core stats that are usually more important for Guardians, more than you will need these stats, and maybe when you have enough of a lead to afford it. If you're behind, this item will not be good for you, because then you will get focused out too much and lose. Definitely an item that's more towards builds where you are ahead. It's also an item that you can consider very late into the build, towards the last 2 slots. I think there it has a bit more of a reason, but then again, at that point of the game, the enemy will also have more protection, so you get less benefit from it. So this is something you need to evaluate against each other. With that, thank you guys for watching. I hope this was insightful. I hope this gave you a little more of an idea about this item. If you're not subscribed yet, feel free to click the sub button. It really helps me out. And maybe the bell next to it. See you for the next one tomorrow. SLOTH, out.